Hey guys, my name's Mannequin and welcome back to Mastering EDM with Logic Pro. So once again, I did not get any submissions from you guys by way of tracks to master, so this is actually back to one of my other tracks, and this is a rather recent track. In fact, this is the Trance track that I have been trying to get a vocalist for, but have been so far unsuccessful. You can see that I actually have a master on this already. It's actually really simple. I just have one EQ and limiter number 6 on here, but I'm going to mute these and pull down the meter here so we have room and we could redo this basically, because I know this is a track that actually it's one of the ones that I really like the mix on, so I kind of figured I'd use this one since I was so proud of how good the mix turned out. And also it's a good example for fast tracks. Sorry about that. It's a good example for fast tracks that are very that just kind of have like a tone like this. Hold on a sec. There we go. Or even more so, if you're thinking, that's not that fast sounding, then you might want to actually listen to, where is it? This part right here. This part is rather fast considering the amount of dynamics and movement that there is going around here. So it's not necessarily the fact that the BPM is high. I'm actually running at 138, so it's not that high. It is a little bit higher. But for trance, it's actually about the sweet spot. And this is kind of more what you'd be expecting when I said fast. So you kind of get the idea there. So this is it's kind of like a faster sound. You got a lot of where's my hat loops? They're right here. So basically, this is kind of my drum loops that I've going on here, and so it's it's faster than you would find with general other drums. That it kind of just you have like a drum hat, drum hat, drum hat, drum hat, and it's not as blended per se as these ones. So that's kind of where that's actually a perfect word to describe how to be careful when it comes to mastering these. Everything is there's a lot of dynamics by way of different things moving around at the same time. So you have the issue of trying to get everything to stand out without it all sounding like a big blend, because like I said, there's a lot of things going on at the same time, and it's easy to get them to all blend together. And the way that you kind of be sure that you're paying close attention to that is mostly in terms of EQ and when you're doing compression to try to bring up the dynamics. So I'll try to go quickly here just because I don't want this to run extremely long. I know that these have generally been long, but that's just kind of the way it's been working. Whenever I try to do a master here, a full master, it ends up taking about an hour. So I'll try to cut that down this time just so I could speed through this and try to show you how to get a good master in a rough sort of sense, so that you're not really worrying about fine-tuning things as much as I usually do, but instead you're actually focusing on just like the important parts of the master, and you're just trying to cut those out. So first thing we'll do is we'll add just a little bit of compression here, and I'm just going to drop in one of the regular compressors because I haven't bothered really looking around for a good substitute compressor, just because Logic's compressors tend to do okay. So we're going to use Platinum Digital. I'm going to turn the attack rather low here, and then I'm going to turn the, actually, you know what, I want the attack around, probably somewhere around here. Just make it open and then make the release rather low. That's what I meant to say. Okay, turn off auto here because auto is not usually good for these sort of things. And I think for this time I'll have just a small knee, so I can kind of let it smooth out the compression a bit. This is what the knee does, by the way. If you watch this curve here, if I turn up the ratio, so you see it's kind of it's curved there, and if I turn down the knee, it eventually becomes a harsh point. So it's basically, does it start compressing when it hits that point, or does it start compressing slightly before and then gradually increase until it hits your ratio? So I'm just going to have a bit of a curve on there, just kind of smooth it out a little bit. You kind of see there's still that kink there, but at the same time, it's just a little bit smoothed out. So we're going to leave that there and then hop back here and do a little bit of compression. So first of all, we need to find the right spot. I'm going to have the ratio up at 5 for now, and then I'll adjust the threshold in to get that going. So here we go. So right there, I've basically dialed in how much compression I want by pulling the threshold to the right spot, and I turn down the ratio to get it so basically it's kind of less sensitive to, you know, when it starts to get loud and quiet, how much does it actually change. So I turned down the threshold to kind of get to the point to where I was compressing. Then I made sure it was just barely affecting the sound, and so it's just accentuating it a slight bit. And then I adjusted the ratio so that it wasn't feeling compressed either. So it's kind of like these two kind of go hand in hand, and it's like two different tones and trying to balance it out. So now I'm going to adjust the attack. I'm probably going to leave the release as is because I don't need to do too much for that. But I'll adjust the attack here to get it in the right spot, and then we should be good for moving on to the next part. Okay, so I basically decided that I'm going to put it right here. Now, the interesting thing to note is that last time, I actually had it at a considerably higher attack, so it took longer to go in, but that's because this is a faster track. So in order to let the transients through, transients kind of being the high pointy parts, if you look at a waveform here, we'll just line this up, zoom in here, just kind of show you guys. If you look at oops, that was not what I wanted to do. Dang it, I screwed up the threshold. Oh well. So if you look here, so you see those sharp pointy parts, those are basically the transients, which is kind of like the parts of the audio files that are very sharp, and they're mostly consisting of high end, and they're kind of like louder parts of the high end. So when you have a faster attack, what it does, it just lets the transients through, and it doesn't let a lot of the main body through. So because we have a lot of small, fast things going on at the same time, I kind of want the attack to be a little bit faster. So in order to add some dynamics, I'm not just following the big overall curve, which you might follow for something like I don't know, you might do that for Tropical House. No, actually, you know what? Tropical House might not be a good example. For like dubstep, there we go. Dubstep is a great example. Dubstep, you'll probably want a much longer attack so that things can punch through and a lot more of the body can go through. But since this is not focused on being extremely punchy and it's more focused on letting the kind of the parts that are kind of moving around, let them bounce around as they will, then I want the attack to be faster, just to let those fast parts through. Remember, if I open it up more, you might think, well, then more of it will go through and it'll be more punchy. Well, not necessarily, because these are moving so fast, it'll start to compress, and then something else will come up and it'll start to compress again. So if you look at the graph, what'll happen is it'll just kind of smooth things out, and things won't let the transients through as much. So if you watch the graph now, I might need to readjust the threshold, but just watch the graph and you'll see it moves around rather fast. And then if I take the attack and I pull it back to kind of let stuff through more, it'll kind of smooth things out more. So not an amazing illustration there, but you do notice that it kind of does smooth things out a bit, so it's not quite as snappy in like areas like this. It's kind of the graph here is kind of smoothed out a bit more, and then if I pull this back down, it kind of just shows you just a little bit that it is going a bit faster. So one thing to keep in mind is that the graph isn't everything, so just go by your ear. While the graph can be helpful, so don't trust the graph unless you're just trying to check generally, is it doing what I want it to do, generally speaking. Trust your ears primarily. So let me dial this back in, make sure the threshold and the attack are set correctly, and then we'll move on to the next part. So mainly what we're doing here is we're just kind of letting the click, I always say clip when I mean to say click. We're just letting the click of the kick go through just a little bit more, and we're kind of squashing down some of the other stuff and smoothing it out, and at the same time letting some of those quick dynamics through where they need to be. Now, because this part is this is one of the more smooth parts of the track, other than the break, just because despite the fact that it's kind of like a drop, the main drop synth here has this sort of sound. And if you notice, it's kind of smooth, other than the nice punch at the beginning. Excuse me. Other than the nice punch at the beginning, it's kind of smooth, so it's not as quick and plucky as some of the other synths that are later on throughout the track. So I'm just kind of keeping that in mind for later, but I'm going to master to the loudest part because that's kind of what I want to be checking on. Now what I could do is, since I want focus on the faster parts, since my compression is to accentuate the faster parts, then what I would do is I dial in my compression, making sure it's okay here. I dial in like the attack and threshold to fit better this particular area right here. No, wait, wrong spot. Where is it? I need to zoom out so I can see all this stuff. I think it was here. It's right here. And then in the end, I decided to bring it over here, just because if you pull it down over here, things kind of start to sound smoothed off in the high end a little bit too much. So I'm just bringing it up here to kind of let the hats shine through a little bit more. And then the kick also does sound a little bit better in this area with that too. So then now that I've changed that, I'll go back to the drop and just make sure the compressor isn't doing terrible things. Because remember, I'm dialing it in for this area, but I want to make sure it's not harming this area, which is the loudest area. Dandy, that actually sounds pretty good. Okay, so now we've done the compression here, we could move on to the EQ would be my next move, and then we will. So we'll use the linear phase. Actually, you know what? I want to show you a cool tool that I found. But first, we'll drop a linear phase EQ on, and then we're actually going to drop another plugin I found just today, actually, and I was kind of experimenting with it. And I rather like the sound. So this is a Vox & Go plugin, and it is free, and it's called Overtone GEQ. So the plugin itself looks kind of nasty, but it actually has an interesting tone to it. I'll kind of show you what this does. Is it kind of does it's like an EQ, but it also does harmonic enhancement. If you look at the bottom here, right here, it says harmonically enhanced 7-band equalizer. So our workspace is in this area right now where we could actually split the channels here. So we have the left one here and the right one here, but I'm just going to keep them linked so that I don't have to deal with 2 EQs and matching them up perfectly. I could just use one here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you where this one shines. And if you listen, it'll actually, when I pull up the high end, it's very good at making the high end sound nice, and it makes it sound bright and also kind of I don't know what the word is, but it's kind of warms it up and makes it crispy. So just take a listen. I'll kind of show you the various bands and what they do to the sound. So the great thing about this one is the high end and the mids are actually like basically these 4 bands. Oops, sorry about that. These 4 bands right here are very nice sounding. Okay, I need to scoot my microphone away. Actually, you know what? I'll just here. 1 second here. Let's see if I get. There we go. That's a little bit. That should be a bit better. Okay. So we have these 4 bands here that are basically it kind of, when you pull them up, it sounds like it's EQing and distorting at the same time, just a little bit, and that's a very nice sound in terms of what we want to be doing with the mastering. So I'm actually going to put this before the linear EQ. You kind of see I have it that way, so I could add these harmonics and then shape the sound signature after I've added harmonics using this. So I'm going to actually kind of play around with this, and because I'm not entirely used to how the Q factor for these are, the curve factor. So basically, you know, in Logic, you could do this. These ones have a static curve for each one. So you have to kind of keep that in mind when you're pulling it up. You can't like adjust the width of the band. So I'm going to kind of mess around with this and see if we get some good sound out of it. And then we'll go on and EQ with the linear phase EQ next. So what you'll notice here is that the high end here, this really controls how much the kick cuts through, which is why I really like this EQ here, especially for like dropping on a master or just dropping on your kick drum, because the way it does the click of a kick drum, when you boost it, it just sounds so good as opposed to just getting a channel EQ and boosting the high end. Because if you just were to get the kick drum and boost the high end, it kind of just adds brightness. It doesn't just like make the click sound more clicky as well. So you see that just kind of adds brightness, but if I go into this one and I do the same thing, that should really show you an example of where EQs actually like make a huge difference when you just like get two different EQs and you use them for different things. Now you might not have noticed before, like, why do people bother to get like two different EQs and use them for different things? Now I've kind of shown you here the big difference between the two. When you use the linear phase EQ and you just start boosting the high end, what happens is it starts to like make everything sound sharp and harsh. But if you get this one, it makes everything sound very crispy and bright. And I just love the tone of that for the high end. Now, the great thing is, too, this is actually centered at 12 kilohertz by default. It looks like I can change this. I didn't realize that before. But that's actually a good thing to kind of target, because when you go to linear phase EQ and you start to boost the high end, you could actually tend to... this is a different EQ. This one. When you go into the high end, you tend to go above 12 kilohertz, more into like this sort of area. So not too much higher, but still higher. And so the fact that this one's kind of centered at 12 is a good spot. But if you think about it, if I actually put this one on 12 kilohertz, we'll do that. 1200, there we go. Actually, that'd be 12,000. But yeah, and then we'll kind of thin this out a bit. I'll just kind of show you what it sounds like when this one's centered around here. So basically, no matter what I do, it just sounds harsh and sharp. But if I'm going to leave that one there. I'm just going to pull up a single dedicated overtone one here. Vox and Go overtone GEQ. And I'm just going to show you on the high end on this one. It just sounds like it's getting brighter. It doesn't sound like it's like screaming at you and making a hissing kind of harsh sort of sound. It just makes it sound brighter overall. And so that's really a great comparison between the different sounds of different EQs and why you would use them for different things. So I kind of shaped this signature here. Okay, that is flat. Good. I shaped the signature of this one here that I've kept. Just kind of do a high-end boost because I love the way this does the mids to the highs. The low end, it kind of stinks at. If you try to boost the low end, this is the sort of sound you get. So to me, when you try to mess with the high end on this one, let's see if I can figure out how to reset this. Oh, there we go. Okay. When you mess with did I say high end? When you mess with the low end on this one, it starts to lose dynamics, it feels like. So just for this purpose, like I wouldn't use this when there's a kick drum involved, just because it kind of kills the low end in the kick drum. So I would personally just use this for the high end on a kick drum, but if you were doing something else like a sub bass or something, you might like the way it warms it up or something. So just realize that just because I'm saying that this is great for the high end right now doesn't mean that's the only time you would use this tool. So we've done a boost to the high end. We kind of this is a great way to add harmonics, and harmonics I kind of talked about just briefly, but in the terms of mastering, what you have is if you add harmonics that from around this range, it basically takes the sound of this and pushes it up and down at the same time. So that's what harmonics kind of do. They just kind of spread the sound out across the spectrum, and that's a great thing for the high end. If you could get the high end right here and spread it down to around here, then that's a really great thing, because if your audio gets encoded, whoops, that's a wrong button, entirely wrong button. If it gets encoded and kind of cut down like this, then you'll lose a lot of the high-end information. But if it's been pushed down to here, it'll still sound okay. So that's just something to keep in mind. Okay, so without further ado, let's get into the linear phase EQ. And I really like the way this EQ is shining through. So we're going to do linear phase EQ to do our shaping now. So this one was kind of like harmonic, adding harmonics. And now this one is actually going to be our shaping. So make sure this is reset to the default, recall default, and then I'll go ahead and dial some of this in. So first, as usual, we start with the cuts. So we'll start with the low cut. So I'm just going to drop there because I kind of want to pull this up a little bit more than just 30 because this particular track has some unattractive sub in some areas. So I'm going to kind of tone down a bit of the sub as well. So that's why I pulled it up above 30. And then I'll cut the high end and... Okay, we'll call that good. So we've basically cut the highs and lows, just kind of like the methodical thing that we do there. Not so much by way of shaping the sound, more of just for when we bounce it down and start to encode it, making sure that we don't have some excess stuff on the high end or low end that causes problems in the long run. So now this particular part, since I already boosted the high end a bit, I'm probably not going to do too many boosts around the high end like I normally would. I'd normally do like a boost around here. I might do one more around this area, but probably not much around here. It might be a very slight one up here. So we'll kind of listen to this, and then we'll try to dial something in here. Actually, first, make sure that's set, and then we're going to start with this one. So what I did was I found basically there's two spots here that are kind of nasty sounding. There's one nasty spot right here and one nasty spot right here, but bringing this up, this general area up, does kind of make the synth stand out a bit more. So I kind of centered this in between the two spots that don't sound too good, and put it in this spot that sounds okay. And I'm boosting here to kind of just bring up the presence so that it kind of stands out a bit more. So now I'll kind of shimmy this one around, see if I can find a spot for it, and it's probably just going to end up a very subtle boost here. So I'm actually going to experiment a little here. I ended up, so I did the boost here, very subtle. It's actually less than a decibel here. And then I took this one, actually boosted up a considerable amount. So what I'm doing is I'm taking that harshness that we were originally getting here. I'm actually deliberately putting it in here, but then I kind of brought down this a little bit just to cut out some of that harshness as well. So I'm kind of like trying to get that harsh sort of sound, just to kind of bring it out just a little bit. And then now we could go to this area over here, since it seems like the high end is basically well tuned. Just kind of A/B it really quick, show you the difference between having this on and then turning it off. So big difference already. Now, there's a couple things that we could do here. First, we could take this one and actually try to find an area around here to boost, or we could go here and try to cut. And I think I'll kind of just mess around over in this area until I find which one it seems this track needs. So I don't imagine I'm going to be boosting much around here, but it could happen. We'll see. Okay, I think that just barely affects the kick. So I'm going to keep that there unless I end up needing another band. So it just barely adds a little bit more punch to the kick when I boost there. And then we'll kind of use this one to decide if we want to boost the bass or if we want to actually cut this area around here. Now we could eventually go use the shelf to boost the bass, but we'll see how that works out. Okay, so here we go. Okay, that's about good. So if you look at here, compared to the last master I did, this EQ is a lot more subtle. And then you do have to realize that I am boosting on some of these as well. I don't think it tells. Okay, so it says that's a 6 decibel. So that means that these ones are probably 1, 2. These ones are under 3 for sure. And so it's just a matter of these ones aren't huge boosts as well, but you just want to keep that in mind when you're kind of looking at the curve, because basically we have an extra thing from around here that's kind of just boosting about that much extra. So, but that said, you'll notice there's a very subtle curve here. It's not as anywhere near as drastic as it was in my other ones. The two biggest boosts here, I have the 2.9 from the high shelf and the 2 from the low shelf. And this one's kind of counteracted by the cut here anyway. So it never actually reaches that highest point. It's just kind of like around there is when it actually stops going any higher. So technically it's not even a full 2.9 decibel boost. So you'll notice the curve is very subtle, and that kind of shows you that my mixes have improved. Because the other one I talked about how it's kind of old, and you'll notice that I had to do a lot more for the master. But this one, the mix itself is already pretty good, so the master I don't have to do too much extra to. That said, you'll notice that the EQ, when it's off and when you turn it back on, it makes a huge difference despite the small things that we're doing. That's the whole thing about less is more in terms of mastering and mixing. If you do less of the right thing, so basically you do small amounts of the right thing, it builds up to become something that's so much better than if you do a lot of the wrong thing. So if you do very subtle EQs in just the right spot, then it'll sound a lot better than if you do drastic EQs in the wrong spot. So this one, actually, I think we can attribute a lot of this to this overtone EQ plugin as well. Because this EQ is really awesome, and it does. I was looking for a harmonic, something that adds harmonics to a track. or basically to audio. Just some sort of harmonic distortion to kind of add that. And then I ended up stumbling across this one today, and I got it, and I tried it out, and I absolutely fell in love with it. I just love the way it brings kicks out and makes them cut through the mix. So we have these three things here, and you'll notice it sounds really stinking good, and we haven't even gone into the actual limiting yet. So we'll actually just slap on a limiter here, and we don't need to worry too much about what's going on in the limiter because it already sounds so darn good. As usual, I'm going to go drop in limiter number 6, but this time I'm not going to go for the preset. I'm going to manually set everything myself. So first we want to make sure is that, so we have the compressor on here. We're going to be doing some gain boost to this, and we want to make sure these are all set to the right things. Okay, so the limiter, I like to run that multiband. This one I actually ran on multiband, I think, before. Yes, I had this on multiband. I actually had it on C, interestingly. So, and that's the kind of smoother sort of sound. I'll probably dial this in somewhere in between today instead of having it fully harsh. I'll kind of have it somewhere in the middle. And then the speed is good. We want the peak limiter linked so that the low end is compressed in mono. And then we want the threshold and gain we'll adjust later. Yep, high frequency limiter is off. That's good because we don't really need that. Clipper is off, that's okay, and that's set to digital clip. Okay, so we'll just kind of start pulling this up and see where things go. So I did a whole bunch of things without saying anything I did. So the first thing I did was I dialed in just some gain to kind of start things going, and then I adjusted the ratio at the end. You kind of see I was doing that. Get away, little tooltip. But I kind of want the ratio low right now because if I pull it up, it's going to be doing too much compression with this, and I don't want this to be doing too much compression because it's just an RMS compressor, so it is kind of slower. And then I made the attack so it was not too slow, so I was kind of not moving at all. I just brought it down to the point where it was kind of moving along with the track, but it was still rather slow because it's just kind of supposed to level out the track just a little bit. So that's kind of what I did here, basically just moving things around. Didn't touch the release, didn't touch dry mix, didn't change that. So I was just kind of adjusting the ratio so that it wasn't doing too much compression, turning up the gain in general so we could just kind of get a boost into here. And then I adjusted the attack like I said. So now into the peak limiter. First thing, I pulled down the threshold so we are at just kind of under 1 because I'm going to be I need some headroom for when I do some stuff over here. And then I just started basically pushing the gain up until it started sounding like it was kind of starting to clip. And I apologize if the volume level kind of changed weirdly because I was also adjusting the volume level on the mix as well with my little board here. So things kind of changed because I was tweaking that so to make sure that I wouldn't be getting any clipping. Okay, so here we go. Let's do this one more time. We'll kind of adjust the gain just a little bit more and see if we get that kind of dialed in. Okay, now you'll notice I could, just because of how smooth the mix is overall, I could pull this up a lot higher, but I didn't like the tone I was starting to get because it kind of started to sound squashed and harsh. So what we're actually going to do is we're going to leave it at that because that's kind of like the sweet spot for where it keeps the dynamics, but it also pulls up the volume level quite a bit. I don't think I'll actually adjust the type because if I bring it down to A, it'll start to sound harsh, which is the reason I wasn't pulling it up higher. And if I bring it up to C, it might smooth it out too much. So we'll just kind of leave it as is. So the next part, we're actually going to skip by the high frequency limiter, which I honestly do not like for EDM. And then we're going to go into the clipper. We're going to try to warm it up just a little bit and see how that sounds. So we're going to pop this on here and set it to multiband mode, and then we'll go. Okay, so it didn't do much there. First of all, I pulled up the ceiling here, so we're just clipping at 0. And basically what I did around here was I took the threshold and I just started pulling it down until it started sounding too smooth. And then you kind of saw I went all the way down here, and then I went all the way back up, and then just started checking it again. So that's kind of just to get a feel for the general sound we're going to get from this track, and then I actually start to dial it in. So right around here, we're warming it up just a little bit, but it doesn't start to sound smooth until we get like right around here. So we just leave it right here because that's kind of the sweet spot between bright and warmed up. And now what I could do is I could actually take the signal here and make sure the upsampling is set to signal, and then set that to 4 times up there just by clicking that, and it'll kind of smooth it out just a little bit more. We'll listen to that. Okay, that's generally good. So I tweaked that just a little bit more. I brought in just a little bit more since when we turned the upsampling to signal, it changed the tone just a little bit, so I kind of adjusted it based on that. Now, I'm not going to mess with the knee just because I kind of like where it's at and I don't feel we need to really mess around with it. But once again, this basically, as you pull it one direction, I don't remember which one, it starts to sound more distorted, and the other direction starts to sound smoother. So we're just going to leave it as is because I like the sound of that. So now what we'll do is we'll take the protection here, and we're going to start to pull up the final output and see if we get just a little bit more loudness out of it, and then we should be good. Okay, so now for the important part. Let's move to a different section and just double check to make sure everything's fine. If you can't tell, the answer is no, everything is not fine. What kind of sound? It sounds like the bass is kind of being crushed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just loop a section here, and we'll listen to this. And I think it's probably due to our protection here. I don't think it's a clipper. It might be the clipper, though. Okay, so you'll notice I did quite a few things there, but essentially the only things I kept was I changed the type. I just shifted it over to 3, and that kind of just changed the tone just a tiny bit, and I kind of like it a little bit better. And the gain here, I pulled this gain all the way down because I found out the limiter is what's causing that sort of sound that we are getting. And then I was able to pull up the, I tried to tweak this around, but I didn't do anything, so I just brought it back to where it was. Then I pulled up the output here so we can kind of digital clip that. So now we gotta check one final time, go back to our loudest part, and make sure everything is good. So let's see if this is the right spot. And then we should be good. We could actually just listen to different parts of this track as well. I think there's one other spot that'd be kind of worth checking is here. So there was one trouble spot that we want to keep in mind here, and that is the effect that I have here. It's also clipping on the pad as well. Let's see what's running that. Okay, I think I have the solution here. So what we could try to do is we could try to take this peak limiter and utilize it. You know what? I really like the tone though. Man. Actually what I could do... I'm feeling very conflicted right now because I like the tone that we get in the in both sections here, and I don't want to kind of mess with it, but I'll try this anyway. Actually, you know what? Screw that. Since I was just kind of pointing out how I was trying to do this faster, but in the end, it didn't end up much faster. So we'll just stick with this, and I know it has just a little bit of distortion there, but it's not that big of an issue because ideally, this is actually supposed to be a vocal track, and there's supposed to be other stuff going on there. So that's not even like the finalized sound I'd be getting from this, because I'd probably have vocals in that area right there. And then the vocals would probably cover up the clipping in the very smooth pads and the bass, just because the vocals have high end, and that would kind of be more likely to go through the clipper, and that would kind of brighten things up, and the pad wouldn't be as affected, kind of be masked by the vocals. So that's kind of, you know, it's partially a decision of I don't want to just spend hours doing this, and partially also a decision of realizing that I'm going to be adding more, and that's probably not going to become the small clipping here is probably not going to be an important factor later on when I actually would hypothetically add vocals there. So that's pretty much it. I mean, I could actually show you. It's going to be very interesting here. But if I turn off all of these and show you, we'll show you my favorite spot of the track. It's because it's a good representation here. It starts right here, ish, goes on. Make sure it's all lined up. And we have a good section here. Okay, so we're going to listen with the old plugins, the preliminary master I did a while back, and then we'll swap to the new ones. There is a drastic difference there. So the old master, it sounds smoother. The low end kind of feels rumbly, and the high end does not cut through at all. So the old one is actually, and it's also a lot quieter. I didn't even bother mentioning that because that's kind of like, that's a side thing. I mean, tone is the first thing that's important. So when I add all this other stuff and I just did it differently, you kind of see the two limiters here, limiter number 6, limiter number 6. Actually, this ended up around the same area. This ended up around the same area. Release is very different. Attack is very different. And but otherwise, the compression is pretty much the same in terms of the gain and ratio there. But the tone is different, and as you can see by the attack and release difference. So this it's got a much faster attack, and the release is a lot longer. This one has a fast release and a much slower attack. So that's, it just changes the tone. And this one's set all the way over to C. This one's multiband. That's multiband. That's at 3, so not much of a difference there, just slight difference. Threshold is at 1. Threshold's at 1. And these are actually almost the exact same spot. And then let's see, what else do we have here? The protection is, this one's doing, ours is doing a lot more boost on the protection. And the clipper, let's see what the clipper's doing. This one, the clipper is, this one's running, ours is running the clipper a bit more, so it's kind of smoothing it out a bit. And other than that, all the settings are the same, except for this is set to normal mode as opposed to multiband mode, which is probably why this one sounds a little bit smoother. And then, like I said, this one is clipping at a much, it's clipping it a lot more. So this one's kind of just leaving it as is. So part of the reason is because this final boost that we're doing, that brings up a lot of loudness. And then the difference between the EQs, if we were to actually leave the same, we'll turn off the compressor here. We'll leave the same limiter on, just kind of swap between the two EQs just to give you just show you the difference between the sound of the EQs themselves. Okay, so it sounds to me like the older EQ has too much bass. It kind of sounds rumbly, but I am wearing headphones, so I can't tell for sure. Now, and then the high end, once again, the high end of this one is just so much better. I love Vox & Go Overtone GEQ. It's just doing amazing things to the high end right now. I'm going to use it a lot more often now. But yeah, overall, this master is a lot better than the previous master. Sorry about that. So I just walked you through. I had already mastered this track, but I walked you through a 1-hour master, and we ended up with a much better master. Now, that said, it has been quite a few months since I originally made that track, so I have improved over time, and I've gotten better. But once again, personally, I would just check this mix on my, or this master rather, on my monitors one time before calling it quits. But like I said, I can't do that with you guys just because I can't run my monitors while I'm recording. So I did quite a bit there in terms of, relative. I have a compressor and overtone GEQ. This one only has linear phase EQ and the limiter 6. So I kind of added 2 more plugins here, but really it really helped the tone. Now, actually, I'm just kind of curious. I'm going to check this, see if our compressor makes a big difference in the grand scheme of things. I'm just going to A/B compressor off, compressor on, and we can kind of tell. That makes one heck of a difference. I don't know if you could tell. I just stopped it so quickly because I realized it so fast. But the kick really hangs out when you have the compressor off. And when you turn on the compressor, it just tightens up the whole mix. And it makes everything kind of move a lot faster, it kind of feels like. It feels like everything's kind of punching where it needs to punch. And it doesn't feel like everything's kind of blended together. So that compressor makes a world of a difference. I'll play it one more time just in case you didn't notice. I'll try to have longer time between the comparisons, but it'll just give you an idea. Just really listen to the kick. Anyway, so you could probably tell there that there was actually a big difference in the low end of the kick. Also, it kind of felt like, if I pull up an EQ, kind of felt like around here, this 1 kilohertz area, it kind of felt like the kick punched through a bit better in this area as well when I had the compressor running. So kind of some of the more of the high end went through as well. Now we could look at the multimeter. Quite frankly, I don't care what it says because my ears say it sounds awesome. So, but I'll just kind of show you what the multimeter looks like anyway. Actually, hold on, let me hold the peaks really quick. Hold infinite. Okay, so this is one thing I want to show you. One thing that's really hard to do in some of your tracks is getting this part to peak really high. Because if you look at a lot of professional tracks, the one thing you'll notice between theirs and yours that the difference is yours kind of goes up, it bumps up, goes down, goes back up, and then kind of down. Now, but if you just watch this particular band right here. And if you'll notice that it peaks a lot higher. It's not like a bump. It's like a peak there. And I'll talk about it in a second, but just kind of look at it and watch it. Now, this is something I rarely see in my tracks, but I see in a lot of professional tracks. And what it is basically you find the perfect spot for the kick to punch through, and you find basically the sweet spot of the bass for the kick, and then you kind of focus the kick around that by EQing around and on that area and compressing so that that area kind of shines through. This is something I rarely see in my tracks. Most of the time, it's kind of more of the rounded off sort of sense, but you'll notice that one does kind of peak a lot more. And also it goes rather high. Sometimes you'll find yourself like you can't get the kick to go quite as high. It's just the bass is like around here and everything. But if you could actually get the sub of the, or not the sub of the bass, just generally the peak of the bass, in terms of, this general area, if you could get that to stand out really well without everything distorting, without things sounding muddy, and it's just really shooting up there, that's a good sign that you have the right amount of bass and it's in the perfect spot. So if you could get this peak here and yet it doesn't sound like you have too much sub or it doesn't sound muddy, then you've pretty much nailed it. And I didn't realize that. It's kind of good that I popped in and showed you guys that. I didn't realize that this track kind of had that. And granted, I did spend a lot of time trying to match this kick to some other professional trance tracks that I was listening to. So this is actually one of my better examples of when I really try to nail the mix. And the master here, once I redid the master here and I put more effort into the master, it really shined through as well. And now this track is sounding even better than before. So it's kind of good that I actually went in and did this track to kind of show you guys, because now I ended up with a better master track for myself. What do you know? But anyway, I am really proud of how this turned out, just because it did turn out better than before. And also, I kind of like how it ended up. This one thing that I see in a lot of professional tracks, but I find very hard to put into my own tracks, just because my tracks tend to have, it sounds kind of muddy in that area, or it sounds like there's not enough bass or whatever, but if I try to boost the bass, it just sounds terrible. But this is a great case where I said I can't tell if I have too little bass, because, you know, I said the old one was muddier, and I was actually mastering that one on my speakers. But now it kind of sounds like I can't tell if it has too much bass, but that's because I'm on my headphones. But by looking at this, I could tell that it probably has the perfect amount of bass, because the bass doesn't sound bad in my headphones. And I'm actually seeing this peak here that I see in a lot of professional tracks, but I rarely see in my own. So that's a good sign that the bass is actually balanced in the right spot. So otherwise, you kind of generally see that we don't want to follow the peaks, just because there are abnormalities that kind of show these, but I just wanted to mark this by showing the peaks here. Generally, you need to just kind of watch the spectrum and kind of make sure that it generally follows the right shape, which I can kind of show you here. Now I might have a little too much highs, I can't tell for sure, but you kind of see it follows a little bit differently from actually all the peaks there. So don't always just trust the peaks. The reason I'm trusting the peaks for this is because I need to be able to talk over this. Well, I can turn it down. It's kind of annoying to have music playing while I'm talking. And I'm sure it's like harder for you guys to hear me. So anyway, I hope this had helpful information on here. I have no idea how long this ran. I kind of feel like it didn't run too long, but then again, it might have been an hour and a half. Anyway, I hope there was helpful information here. I did some new things, and I did some just kind of different versions of old things that I had done before. Kind of like showing you guys with the compression, how I did a little bit differently. I know the attack is one of the things that's most important with compression. When you're trying to get punch and just trying to fit that right into the track. And I believe this was different from my last track. I think the last track I had it right around here. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.